I'm going to talk to you today about the runes. The runes, to our modern culture, come from the Vikings. The problem is that the Vikings did not invent them as our culture has accepted. The Vikings are merely a presenter, a carrier of the runes to the modern culture. The Vikings were given their runic understanding from the cultures that the Vikings descend from, which is the Scandinavian cultures. Be it the Swedes, be it the Finns, be it the Norwegians, be it the Danes, be it the Franks. A number of cultures had direct influence with the runes, many more than I have stated, just specifically Scandinavian. All of the European cultures, north of the Alps, as in north of Italy, had access to the runes pre-Latin. Since I have found more than 50 different variations of the rune language, or the rune languages, translated into Latin at a specific date, you can't translate something from nothing. You can invent it, you can create it, you can invent it, but you cannot translate. The word translation proves, linguistically, with 50 different variations of the sentence, from the previous culture into a Latin base. One or two, even 12 versions of runes translated into Latin would not prove it. 50 does. The runes are a form of divination. This is correct. But divination is a way of tracking electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic vibrations, and electromagnetic cycles, which, if you think about it, is physics. Electromagnetics is the study of motion. Since electromagnetics themselves are protons, neutrons, and electrons, which is surprisingly accurate and surprisingly close to God, Goddess, and balance between protons, neutrons, and electrons. A positive, as in a positive charge, a negative charge, and a balance between. That's the definition for God, Goddess, and balance between, and that is also the definition for protons, neutrons, and electrons, which is also the way a megalith is designed. So, you've got two upright posts and a crossbar. Well, the two upright posts, God, Goddess, balance between. So, the runes are a language translated into Latin. They're also mathematics. How do I prove that they're mathematics? Well, at 300 AD, 2 to 300 AD, at the point where the runes were starting to be carved into monoliths, which is one rock, as a place marker, a time marker, a you are here marker, which is a little bit more elaborate than a place marker, a navigation aid, and a variety of other things. Place marker being headstones and the like. The concept of the runes being a math may be hard to deal with, but there is a thing called the runic half-month calendar of 19 months with 15 days, and 5 and 6 months, one of them being floating, every 4 years in bulk, in the middle of February, sounds familiar, has 16 days. The other 3 years it has 15 days. So the runic half-month calendar works more accurately than the Julian calendar. It also works a little bit more accurately than the Gregorian calendar, because the Gregorian calendar uses a mathematical trick to calculate for the missing hours and the missing minutes and the additional hours and additional minutes, depending on the weather patterns of the Earth, on its not only rotation, but its ecliptic. The calendar takes into account, counts the amount of minutes, days, between one Sabbath and the next Sabbath, and the next Sabbath, and the next Sabbath, being 8 Sabbaths per year. Well, the exact minute these things occur is how the calendar is tracked. So naturally, the leap time is accounted for. Naturally, the long period of time leaps are also accounted for by the tracking exact position of the solstice, Sabbath, equinox, blot, depending on what language you are using to describe the 8 times a year when the Earth is in the exact same position every year. The runes track that, which means it's a science. The tracking of those 8 times a year, as well as the position of the Earth in relation to the Sun over 24 years, 576 years, 13,824 years. This is tracking over time. This is what the runes are. This is what the runes do. You can speak with them. You can write with them. You can add, subtract, multiply, and divide with them. You can track time with them. You can track the migration patterns of species with them. You can track weather patterns with them. Electromagnetic is tracking weather patterns. And you can track everything else with them. This is what the runes are. This is what the runes operate from. And the runes predate Latin by a lot. How do we know that the runes predate Latin? We know the runes predate Latin by a number of different features. 1, translated into. 2, warfare. The Romans were actively conquering the Europeans. You cannot create a language this complicated, a math this complicated, a scientific format this complicated under battle conditions, under conquest. When you're being genocided, you cannot create something this complicated in a war zone. And Europe was a war zone from 180 BC up to the fall of the Roman Empire, through the Dark Ages, up until mid-1500s. It was a solid, hard war zone, only slacking off a little bit up in Europe. Only stopped being a war zone in the last our time, 150 years, with several notable exceptions. World War I, World War II, which for the most part was fought on the European continent. So, how do we know, as a matter of fact, that the runes predate 300 AD creation? Because the runes stretch from eastern Turkey, northern Iraq, western Iran, to Greenland. From the North Pole down to northern Italy. Too big a space to cover in too short a period of time under battle conditions, and 50 different variations to account for. You can't do that. You cannot, with those negatives, the runes have to be ancient, very, very old, to be able to be built and cover more than a quarter of the globe, especially with dealing with 300 cultures. The runes are not actually called the runes. The runes are called the Futhark, Futhark. Feu Uruz Thurisaz Anzuz Redokinas are the runes. Best if name is given correctly.